A world split in two. The world had already cracked once, in August 1961, when barbed wire and concrete sliced Berlin in two. Now, 14 months later, the fissure had widened into a chasm wide enough to swallow every living soul. In Washington, President John Fitzgerald Kennedy stared at the latest Central Intelligence Agency briefing on his mahogany desk, the October 15th report still warm from the photo interpreter's hands. His brother Bobby stood beside him, both men understanding that the grainy black and white images showed something that could end everything. Just 90 miles south of Key West, the Soviets had been busy, not with tractors or sugar mills, but with nuclear missiles pointed northward like accusing fingers. The timing was no accident. Nikita Sergeyevich Khrushchev had watched the Bay of Pigs invasion collapse in April 1961, American-trained Cuban exiles drowning in the swampy shallows of Playa Girón. The Soviet leader had been humiliated by the 15 American Jupiter missiles stationed in Turkey, each one capable of reaching Moscow in 10 minutes. Now he saw his chance to balance the scales. In Havana, Fidel Alejandro Castro Ruz stood on the balcony of the presidential palace, surveying his transformed capital. The revolution had survived the American invasion attempt, but he knew they would come again. The defense pact he signed with Moscow in July gave him what he needed most: protection. In Washington, Defense Secretary Robert Strange McNamara spread his charts across the Pentagon's Situation Room table, each graph showing another way the world might end. The arc of destruction stretched 3,500 miles, a curved sword hanging over 200 million lives. Kennedy understood what his military advisors did not, that every calculation had to include the unthinkable. The diplomatic dance had begun, though neither side yet knew the steps. 100 megatons of destructive force waited in silos and submarines, enough to erase human civilization. The 13 days that would decide everything had begun. Sunday, the 14th of October, 1962. Major Richard Hazer hunches in the cramped cockpit, oxygen mask fogging, as his long-range K-38 camera whirs and clicks. 928 frames of Cuba's western coastline glide past his lens, each negative a silent witness to what no American eye was meant to see. Monday, 15th of October, CIA imagery interpreters crowd shoulder to shoulder, squinting at contact sheets the size of newspapers. One analyst's hand trembles as he traces the unmistakable cigar shape of an SS-4 Sandal missile on its erected trailer. The range, 1,100 miles. Washington, New York, the entire eastern seaboard, suddenly within the crosshairs. Dawn, Tuesday, 16th of October. CIA Director John McCone lays the enlarged prints before President Kennedy like tarot cards of doom. 32 missiles counted. 40,000 Soviet troops already dug in. Attorney General Robert Kennedy slips into the room, eyes widening as he sees the evidence. For the first time, the Executive Committee of the National Security Council, ExComm, gathers in secret. General Curtis LeMay pounds the table, demanding immediate airstrikes. Secretary of Defense Robert McNamara counters with talk of a naval blockade, a word not yet spoken aloud. Dean Rusk, voice barely a whisper, leans to McNamara. "This is the week that unmade the world." The president orders the shades drawn tighter, the air thick with tension and nicotine. That evening, Kennedy keeps his scheduled campaign trip to Connecticut, face calm, joke ready, while nuclear war plans churn behind his smile. In Moscow, Premier Nikita Khrushchev paces his Kremlin office, unaware the Americans have found his Caribbean ace. Fidel Castro, meanwhile, rides in an open jeep through Havana streets, waving to crowds who have no idea their island is about to become the epicenter of the world. Each hour now ticks toward confrontation, each photograph another thread pulling the planet toward midnight. The President's Secret War Room.
From this moment forward, for 13 days, the fate of every living soul would be decided within these four walls. Monday, October 16th, 8:45 antemeridium. The Cabinet Room transforms into the Executive Committee of the National Security Council, ExComm. John Fitzgerald Kennedy sits at the head, his face drawn from sleepless nights. Robert McNamara, the defense secretary with the mind of a mathematician, spreads reconnaissance photos like tarot cards across the table. General Curtis LeMay, cigar clamped between teeth, growls his impatience. Each day, sometimes twice, this council convenes. The world outside remains blissfully ignorant. Robert Kennedy becomes the president's shadow courier, slipping through side entrances, his destination, the Soviet embassy on 16th Street. Ambassador Anatoly Dobrynin waits in his ornate study. Through these secret channels, messages pass like invisible threads. At the United Nations, Edlai Stevenson prepares for diplomatic confrontation, but the press grows restless. Reporters circle like sharks scenting blood. Salinger's stonewalls with practiced ease. Thursday, October 18th. Soviet Foreign Minister Andrei Gromyko arrives at the White House. The meeting takes place in the Oval Office. Gromyko, with pale eyes and diplomatic smile, denies any offensive weapons in Cuba. The lie hangs in the air like a blade. Kennedy's jaw tightens imperceptibly. He knows. They both know he knows. After Gromyko departs, ExComm reconvenes. McNamara proposes the naval blockade, labeled quarantine to avoid declaring war. LeMay explodes. "It's a big Pearl Harbor," he snarls. The Joint Chiefs push for immediate massive airstrikes. Robert Kennedy carries more secret notes through Washington's October night. The decision weighs heavier each hour. Sunday, October 21st. The final choice approaches. Quarantine line, 500 nautical miles. Effective Wednesday, October 24th. The world's longest week begins. Monday, October 22nd, 1962. The White House press office is a hive of hushed tension. At 8 o'clock sharp, every major network cuts its programming. President Kennedy appears, face taut, eyes ringed with sleeplessness. He tells 100 million Americans that medium-range ballistic missiles are 90 miles from Florida. The word he chooses is not blockade, it is quarantine. Across the Potomac, the Pentagon's lights burn like a second sunrise. Admiral George Anderson briefs carrier captains. The line is 500 nautical miles from Havana. Tuesday, October 23rd. The Organization of American States votes 19-0 to back the quarantine. At Norfolk Naval Station, the fleet weighs anchor. 180 ships sortie. Essex, Randolph, Independence, each a floating city of war. Below the surface, Soviet submarine B-59 creeps westward. Batteries low, air foul. Wednesday, October 24th. At 6:30 a.m., American reconnaissance planes drop sonarbosses in a deadly necklace. 10:25 a.m. The moment freezes. 25 Soviet freighters halt, dead in the water. 6 ships steam on, metallic leviathans refusing to yield. In the Situation Room, Dean Rusk whispers to McGeorge Bundy, "We're eyeball to eyeball, and I think the other fellow just blinked." General Curtis LeMay demands immediate attack. Strategic Air Command raises its alert level to DEFCON 2. 1,436 B-47 bombers circle the Arctic 24 hours a day. In Moscow, Nikita Khrushchev pounds his desk and calls the quarantine outright piracy. Yet behind the bluster, a quieter channel opens. ABC correspondent John Scally meets KGB station chief Alexander Feklisov. Over coffee and cigarettes, a possible deal is sketched. Remove the missiles. Pledge not to invade Cuba. Robert Kennedy carries the note to the Oval Office through a drizzling dusk. The president weighs peace against the drumbeat of war. Each tick of the clock is a heartbeat for the world. Somewhere beneath the Caribbean, submarine B-59 rises, conning tower breaking the surface like a steel whale. The red line holds, for now. Dawn breaks over the Florida Straits on Saturday, the 27th of October, 1962. A lone U-2 spy plane glides at 70,000 feet, silver wings catching the first light. Major Rudolph Anderson, 35 years old, veteran of over 100 reconnaissance missions, peers through his pressure suit visor at the missile sites below. His camera bay clicks methodically, each frame a ticking time bomb of evidence. Suddenly, a blinding flash. A Soviet SAM missile, streaking upward like a white lance, explodes beneath his aircraft. The U-2 disintegrates, aluminum shards spinning into the stratosphere. Anderson's body, still strapped to his ejection seat, vanishes into the Caribbean. At 6:15 a.m., the Pentagon erupts. General Curtis LeMay pounds the table, demanding immediate retaliation. Secretary McNamara's voice trembles as he warns the president. 3 hours later, another crisis. A low-level reconnaissance jet, disoriented by magnetic anomalies, strays deep into Soviet Siberian airspace. MiG fighters scramble from a frozen airfield. The American pilot, low on fuel, races for the Sea of Japan. DEFCON 3 creeps toward DEFCON 1. B-52 bombers roar down runways in North Dakota. In Havana, Fidel Castro dictates a frantic cable to Moscow. "If invasion is imminent," he writes, "we must never allow the imperialists to land." He urges Khrushchev to launch a preemptive nuclear strike. In the Kremlin, Nikita Khrushchev paces. He composes 2 letters, one conciliatory, offering to remove missiles if America pledges not to invade Cuba. The second letter, harder, demands removal of American Jupiter missiles from Turkey. Evening settles over Washington. Robert Kennedy slips out a side entrance, coat collar turned up. He drives through empty streets to the Soviet embassy on 16th Street. Inside, Ambassador Anatoly Dobrinin pours tea. The 2 men speak in low voices. Bobby proposes the secret deal: no invasion of Cuba, quiet withdrawal of Jupiter missiles from Turkey within 4 to 6 months. Back at the White House, John Kennedy agonizes. Accept the first letter, ignore the second. The world balances on the edge of a blade. Somewhere beneath the waves, submarine B-59 still lurks. The red line trembles, but holds. Sunday, the 28th of October, 1962. Moscow is cloaked in a pale winter dawn as 9 o'clock strikes. Inside Radio Moscow, engineers adjust dials and glance at the clock. A microphone waits. Nikita Khrushchev steps forward, papers trembling slightly in his thick fingers. His voice, gravelly yet steady, rolls across the airwaves in Russian, then in English. "The Soviet government has given a new order to dismantle the arms which you described as offensive." The words echo through kitchen radios in Kiev, in Kansas, in Havana. A collective gasp rises. The world exhales for the first time in 13 days. At the White House, John Kennedy stands by the Situation Room speaker, tie loosened, eyes rimmed red. The president's knees nearly buckle with relief. He turns to his brother Robert, who has just delivered the final secret promise. American Jupiter missiles will quietly vanish from Turkey within months. No public mention, just silence. Out in the Atlantic, gray United States Navy destroyers pivot from confrontation to escort. Soviet freighters, once shadowed like prey, now glide home under watchful but friendly eyes. Sailors on both sides wave tired salutes across the waves. In Havana, Fidel Castro paces the presidential palace balcony like a caged jaguar. His beard bristles with fury. He was not consulted. "No inspection," he shouts to aides. For weeks he bars United Nations observers until quiet diplomacy softens his stance. Washington claims victory, Moscow claims victory. Yet in private, Kennedy scribbles in his notes, "This is not a victory, but it is survival." Years later, Khrushchev will write, "We won because we prevented war." Both men know the blade missed the artery by millimeters. The world steps back from the abyss. In June 1963, a hotline, literally a red telephone, links the Oval Office to the Kremlin. In July, the Limited Test Ban Treaty is signed, banning nuclear tests in the atmosphere, in space, and beneath the seas. The 13 days become the textbook case taught to every future leader on how to dance at the edge of annihilation. The missiles sail east, the warships sail west. The world keeps turning, unaware how close it came to stopping forever. The world exhaled, but the echo of near catastrophe lingered like smoke in October air. In the Kremlin, Nikita Khrushchev stood before the Presidium, his jowls heavier, eyes rimmed red. The agreement he had signed branded across newspapers from Havana to Helsinki as retreat. 2 years later, while planting corn on a collective farm outside Kiev for the television cameras, he was summoned back to Moscow and told his time was over. The missiles of October were remembered as humiliation. Fidel Castro raged in his Sierra Maestra office, the radio crackling with reports of Soviet ships turning back. He had not been consulted. He would never forgive. Isolated from Moscow, he turned his gaze southward, sending doctors and rifles to Congo, Bolivia, Angola, stitching a new revolutionary quilt across the Third World. 13 months after the crisis, on a crisp Dallas noon, 3 shots cracked across Dealey Plaza. John Fitzgerald Kennedy slumped forward, and the country wondered if the ghosts of October had followed him home. His brother Robert, the quiet courier of the secret missile deal, would fall to an assassin's bullet in a Los Angeles hotel kitchen in 1968, the promise of Camelot scattered like spent cartridges. Major Rudolph Anderson never saw another Carolina sky. Posthumously, he received the Air Force Cross, the only combat casualty of the 13 days, his U-2 shattered by a Soviet surface-to-air missile over Baines. In a locked vault beneath the National Archives, whirring reels of magnetic tape kept their own counsel for 3 decades. When finally declassified in the 1990s, the ExComm recordings revealed tremors beneath the calm. Kennedy's voice, "If we appear weak now, we're finished." McNamara muttering, "Jesus, this is no place for rational men." Cuban exiles in Miami heard the same tapes and cursed the name Kennedy, convinced betrayal had cost them their homeland. Then came the Soviet archives, opened like Pandora's box after the hammer and sickle banner was hauled down from the Kremlin. 42,000 Soviet troops had crouched in Cuban cane fields, 100 tactical nuclear warheads already mated to Frog missiles, warheads the CIA never saw. Had the Marines stormed the beaches as LeMay demanded, atomic fire would have greeted them, and the world would have burned before breakfast. Crisis management was born that October, a new academic discipline cradled in ivy halls. Robert McNamara, haunted by the numbers he once fed into bombing algorithms, spent his remaining years pleading for arms control, walking the corridors of the Pentagon with the mantra, "No more Cubas." General Curtis LeMay, ever the iron bulldog, retired muttering that Kennedy had squandered the perfect moment for a first strike. In officer clubs from Omaha to Guam, his legend grew. The man who could have ended it all, but was denied. The missiles were gone, the ships were gone, yet the shadows lengthened. Every future president would carry those 13 days like a secret scar, hearing the echo of the countdown that never quite reached zero. The missiles left Cuba on the morning of October 28th, but the shadow never lifted. Soviet sailors winched the last warhead cases onto the deck of the cargo ship Alexandrovsk, while American destroyers circled like silent greyhounds. Within weeks, the Pentagon orders new wargaming rooms buried deeper beneath the Potomac. Kennedy signs National Security Action Memorandum 238, creating the first Washington-Moscow teletype link, the so-called hotline that will live in two black briefcases, one in the Kremlin, one in the White House. Yet the arsenals keep growing. By 1968, the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty is signed in Washington, Moscow, and London, promising to stop the spread, but not the numbers already aimed at one another. SALT I follows in 1972, freezing launchers but not warheads, and the Anti-Ballistic Missile Treaty tries to keep offense supreme by banning elaborate shields. The embargo against Cuba hardens into law, a permanent cold shoulder across 90 miles of warm sea. Fidel Castro keeps Major Rudolph Anderson's shattered U-2 in a glass hall, its titanium frame twisted like melted silver, a silent witness to the day the sky almost fell. Every October, Harvard's Kennedy School gathers students, generals, and former spies to replay the crisis in real time, the clock still set to Black Saturday. "We were lucky," whispers former ExComm member McGeorge Bundy in 2003, one of the last survivors. Robert McNamara, eyes watery behind rimless glasses, tells a Cambridge audience in 2004, "We came within a hairbreadth of nuclear holocaust, and nobody knew it." The 21st century brings hypersonic gliders that circle the globe in minutes and cyberviruses that can spoof launch commands. 12,000 warheads still exist, polished and ready in silos and submarines from Montana to Murmansk. Every new president inherits the same briefing book, the same red button in the same leather satchel. In split screen, we see Kennedy in October 1962 and a leader in October 24, both staring at identical oceans, both listening to advisors counting down options that end in fire. The same sky that once carried Anderson's doomed U-2 now hosts satellites that read license plates from orbit. The same waves that swallowed Soviet missiles now lap against the same Cuban shore where teenagers dive from the Malecon, unaware of the rusting casings beneath the sand. The crisis ended, but the brink remains. The missiles left Cuba, yet the shadow never did.